Welcome to the Time Monk Radio interview series. I'm your host playing this evening, and we have a very special guest, John Hogue, who is quite well known for his Nostradamus research and predictions, and also for his annual predictions and election predictions. John, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We do appreciate it. And along for the ride are a couple of my friends, Disaster Cat.
Hi.
And Uriel.
Good evening.
So thanks. Let's get going. John, I thought a good place to start would be with 2013. You had a book about that, an ebook, where you went into some predictions for the last year or two. Looking back on it, what do you think? How was 2013?
Well, that book actually is the first time that I've ever expanded my usual annual almanac to contain roughly an 18-month period that covers from May of 2013 all the way into the end of 2014, but more as a mirror to reflect the coming 28 years that happens between two Saturn and Scorpio transits. The reason being that because Saturn is a ruler of business, finance, economy, inheritance, what you leave behind for, in the case of a broader sense of mundane astrology, what you leave behind to your descendants to come, it's basically talking about a period of intense reform and a time when the can has to stop being kicked down the road to deal with a lot of the fundamental structural flaws of our society that are becoming otherwise unsustainable in the next 28 years unless we start making these changes. So the premise of that book was to look at 2013, but also to look at whether there are signs of us identifying the systemic flaws, and then ask prophetically, are the governments and leaders and peoples of the world going to have the political will and leadership skills to fix it? And if not, then what cascades after that? So looking at that, the predictions for 2013, because of the delays in getting the book out, I started actually date-lining a lot of the things earlier in HogueProphecy.com, my website, which writes frequent articles about prophecy trends in current events. And in that, I started already documenting some of the things that were about to happen, and then I go back to the first third of the book. I'm kind of covering what already was covered, and what I usually do is I date every rough draft that I create, doing these sessions, which what I call my oracle, where I do the predictions, and then I document those predictions and note that in the book so that you get an idea when people are reading this years from now. In some cases, with some of my books, they read it as if it was written yesterday, and then they find out it was written like 10 years ago. To give an idea of the time frame of when these predictions were made. What had already come true is I had my use of mundane astrology. I had accurately predicted the two terrorist attempts that I predict would be not the Syrian government, but the Syrian Free Syrian Army, actually trying to create false flag chemical weapons attacks, which would allow a neoconservative Zionist supremacist cabal to take down the Syrian regime as a larger scale strategic attempt to isolate Iran in 2014, 2015, and then attack and destroy the Iranian regime in 2016, which is the basis of my book, Nostradamus, The War with Iran, which looks at his prophecies dating, actually, and describing in the clear many of the things that the 16th century prophet would describe in his obscure language that he used from the 16th century to protect the future from those who might snoop into his prophecies, who are evil and would see themselves in the prophecies and make things worse. That indeed did happen, in that a lot of Nazi leaders, chief among them Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, recognized that Hitler in the prophecies of Nostradamus was Hitler, and they began to use that. He was cynical. He didn't really believe it, but he believed a number of people around him were sincerely working on it and believed that Nostradamus was foreseeing Hitler in World War II. The Nazi astrologers like Karl Ernst Kraft actually tried to see any signs of Hitler winning the war and ran himself into a nervous breakdown when he could not find a very gifted astrologer, but politically naive and Nazi, who he couldn't find, but sincere, he couldn't find Hitler winning the war, which he didn't. I believe Nostradamus saw these things happening. He talks about it in his prophecies about how he would be used, and that's why he was so obscure. But with Iran and with Syria, he's come into the clear, as he will often do for things that are significant, destiny-changing incidences in future history that we all need to attend to either soften the blow or at least understand the blow and prepare a way around a dire way in which history inclined. So he, like I, believe there is no fixed history in the future. There are an infinite number of timelines possible. He describes the continuum as I've experienced the continuum. It's like everything has happened and will happen and has happened. But in our timeline, we can go into what I call the cosmic Costco and look at these infinite shelves of products that are potential destinies, and through our choices in this present as shoppers, if you will, pull down the future that we want to consume. And so the question then is, when you have masses of people making decisions, do they collectively consume the same brand, if you will, of destiny, which they do? Because most people live lives that are, although they dream otherwise, they live lives that are robotic, habitual, and therefore mundanely mechanical. And that means there are patterns, algorithms of stupidity and unconsciousness that is the key often in my ability to accurately foretell the future, because I do not make the mistake of thinking that masses of people will do the 9 out of 10 times the right thing, because I understand that mass unconscious groups of people tend to feed unconsciousness. That it's only individuals that can light the world. For instance, a simple way to argue that: have you ever seen an army of Buddhas? Have you ever seen an army of Christs in our history? It's only one man coming out of the wilderness to see John the Baptist for baptism. It's one man sitting under a Bodhi tree in Bihar. They are loners. They are alone, and yet they by bringing to their full enlightenment their truth and potential, they influence and help a lot of the collective. But enlightenment is an individual thing. Therefore, when studying the future and studying astrologically what can happen, I tend to err on the side of reading the lower potentials of masses of people and politics, which unfortunately makes me pretty accurate.
Yes, that's a problem. Well, there is that old saying about people go crazy in mobs and they regain their sanity one by one.
Yes.
There are variations of that. Well, okay, but let's say for the highlights of 2013, where I think you would say the war not expanding, right? Not having a big war, and now we've even got peace talks, right?
Well, yeah. And that's a great example of everything was set towards, and I dated it in my work, that this is what was going to happen. It would be a third incident, and that would be the incident where Obama's red line was crossed. And what fortunately happened is that potential got overturned by another aspect of this defining aspect in our times, the Uranus-Pluto square. Uranus is the ruler of chaos and revolution and mass-minded things, but also a mass of individuals coming together in brotherhood and sisterhood to help each other. So it has its positive side. against Pluto, which is in Capricorn, the establishment, the government, the economy. To make it as simple as I can in a short period of time. Of course, much more complicated than that.
John, then going forward with this, what are you seeing for the Middle East in 2014 and 15?
Well, to finish my point, the war was not was a situation where the Uranus Pluto square actually overturned power. By a chance joke of Secretary of State Kerry, gave Vladimir Putin of Russia and the president of Assad of Syria an opportunity to say, yes, we will dismantle the chemical weapons, because he used it as a joke, saying they'll never do it. And they said, okay, we'll do it. And that completely overturned the possibilities of war as planned by neoconservative elements and neo-Zionist elements that Barack Obama has become a convert of. And so now that's on its ear. That's set into motion for 2014 and 2015, something I talked about in the Iran book, that there will be a breath of potential peace that will come, because in 2014, we are now on that timeline. But the great danger is that there's on three sides of this conflict, there are elements in all three governments, in Israel, in America, and Iran, that want to see fulfilled their view, warped as it is, of the apocalypse according to the Quran in Iran, the Christian Bible in America, and the Jewish Old Testament Nevi'im in Israel. And that the whole thing is based on misinterpretation, and it's literally a danger of Israel trying to, with its leader Netanyahu, trying to project the traumas of the past into the future that do not exist, and by pushing war on Iran actually create a second Holocaust, which I've been worrying about and writing about since 1990. That the Israelis would do something to actually, where not enough was done to anticipate Hitler, the Jewish people would do too much and precipitate a Holocaust that was not actually there. They created it through their own fear. So I try to caution my friends in Israel about this. So we are now in the period where Barack Obama, who was predicted to be the Black King in Nostradamus, because he is dated for his election, in his first inauguration was roughly a month before the conjunction of Mars and Jupiter, that dated this man as the man elected who, after a calamitous war under cancer, the sign of America, would bring peace to the earth for a long time. So Obama has the destiny to be the peacemaker in the Middle East like no one else has ever been. But he equally has the destiny of moving the world precipitously into the most catastrophic war that has ever been waged in the Middle East by 2016, by August 2016. And the first step towards that is this breath of peace. That could be, even now, the Congress has Democrats and Republicans in the United States who are working and may have enough votes, a supermajority, to invoke further sanctions on Iran that will derail the peace process. And his veto will not be able to overturn it. So we're now waiting even in the next month to see if this will be sabotaged by forces that don't want peace to happen on the planet, because the military-industrial complex is a war market, and it doesn't like to see its markets upended by peace.
Well, that brings a lot of questions to mind. I mean, I think one big one is simply to those of us who live outside the U.S., and we look back on the U.S., I think we see a country that's very overextended and looks like it's kind of not quite as bad as Britain after World War I or something, but I mean, isn't it going to be contracting to just maintain as much as it can going forward?
What it is, America, this new year, we're going to see the anniversary, the century anniversary of 1914. And in the book, Predictions for 2014, I focus more specifically on the main question about our future in this year. Is this actually going to be another year like 1914 and 2014 where history's water breaks and the convulsions and the contractions of another great birthing of a new era happens that initially in the first 4 years might topple things that we've grown used to for 1,000 years. This happened in 1914, 500 to 1,000 years of monarchical, Europe-centric, and then later imperial and colonial empires, where many of them were toppled and the monarchs fell. The German Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Turkish Empire, Britain mortally wounded and retreating from its empire, although still retaining its king. All of this happened in a span of 4 years and basically changed most of the modern history now really can be said to be born from the guns of August 1914. And the question I put out and I feel is that we're in for another 1914, 1918 moment of tremendous, breathtaking, unexpected, rug pulled from under your feet changes in economics, mainly, an end to the fiat economic system that will crash in 2016. But the good news is it crashes more not from just collapsing on its own lack of value, but also because people will have a choice to move to other systems that what you can define the next revolution in modern history being a revolution of decentralization. The concept of centralized banks, centralized power grids, centralized politics is all going to be set on its ear in the next 4 years to a more citizens-friendly, more local political, more encrypted currency, not even based on the gold standard, but based on the value of mathematics, which is a very Aquarian Age concept.
John, do you think that there's going to be another great war coming? I've seen quite a number of people actually referring to 2014 as 1914 over again.
No, it will not. There is not a great world war coming again, but there is a world war that's a little harder for people to identify. And in the new book, I call it World War Stupid. And it's basically a war against our own lack of intelligence in applying our potentials to solve the systemically breaking, collapsing issues of our society. There are too many of us. We are consuming too much of the Earth's resources. We are polluting it, sending us, the entire planet, into a planetary climatological disaster. And so it's almost Mother Nature's war against us, but what she's waging war against, if I'm going to use a personified metaphor for something which is not like that at all, but just poetically speaking, the Earth is in a fever, and it is fighting the disease, and the disease is humans collectively choosing to be dumb about how they live on this planet, using old ideas, old think that goes back to the time when people were few and nature was huge, and we were just Neolithic peoples trying to survive in this vast, huge world. We're still treating the planet Earth like it's still this vast thing that we can exploit, and it's also our enemy, and that is killing us, our civilization, in the coming decade or so. What will happen is we'll begin seeing the unraveling of things by 1915 or 2015 for sure. That will hopefully galvanize the world like what happened in the Second World War, where people were galvanized to wage. They saw a collective shared emergency that required we all pulling together to solve the problem. The main problem we have to solve is our carbon emissions are creating a Paleocene version of a sudden heating up of the Earth's climate. only it took a few thousand years for it to heat up way back in 45, 50 million years ago. We're doing it in 50 to 60 years, and we're turning the dial up on the heat way too fast, way too soon, and it'll be the climate that will perhaps force people to see the emergency and see that their enemy is themselves, and it's their stupidity. And they need to, what I call, formulate an arsenal of intelligence. In World War II, we had the arsenal of democracy. In this crisis of world war against stupid, we have to have an arsenal of intelligence and fashion intelligent solutions. And to this, my contribution to that is to call upon people to meditate, to adopt what will be eventually the eclipsing of religions as we know it from the Piscean age, which were faith-based and belief-based, into more scientific disciplines of religion, which are meditation-based.
Is it your oracle that has given that tells you that there's actually going to heat up? I'm aware that we're doing all the horrible things you're discussing, and I totally agree with you. I just was curious because in my own dreams and things going back probably 30 years, I keep seeing an ice age, and which would be equally a problem. And I also know that there are often in the geological record, there's heating up before an ice age. So I don't know that they're mutually exclusive, but I was just curious because I know that you always talk about the global warming, which may in fact, which obviously is in some places happening. But I just wondered if your oracle is what's telling you this, or if you have just sort of felt that out from your information.
Well, actually, it's always difficult with a person like me who has written so many books and articles and done so many thousands of shows to say what I always say. I have, as far back as Millennium Book of Prophecy in 1994, basically argued the prophetic possibilities of what you're talking about, that there are a collective vision from people in science as well as in the subjective experiences of prophecy, looking at all of this warming, creating an ice age, or a cascading, unraveling global warming. And so I have actually, on Coast to Coast and many other shows and TV shows, been talking about the either-or possibility and pointing out a third possibility which is more directly impactful to everybody listening, and that is, in either scenario, the way in which you and all of us are threatened is through a breakdown of the food system and global famine, which is a common theme in Nostradamus. But I am saying now, as someone who has been evolving this either-or theory, because it's true, a sudden rapid melting of the polar ice cap could alter the ocean currents and do a lot of what the movie The Day After Tomorrow, which was based on Whitley Strieber and Art Bell's book, The Coming Global Superstorm, could theorize as happening, and that is definitely a possibility. But now, when I look at the situation, I am having to say that now the future looks far more like we are cascading into a runaway global warming event, and not an ice age. We are going to have, in the year 2014, the hottest year ever recorded in civilization time. And some of those recordings are based on what people are anticipating who have taken cores out of the Arctic and the Antarctic into some of the paleo lakes that are deep inside the Arctic Ocean and measuring what is there. We're talking about some measurements that have not seen such a rise in temperature and parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere since 20 million years ago. So it is a very, very significant change in what I'm seeing that is actually, for the record, for my record, give whatever it's worth, is that we are not going to see the ice age. We are going to see the warming.
Hey, John,
does that fit more with what Nostradamus was predicting?
Well, Nostradamus predicted more warming than he did ice.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, he did. He was much more about the great latitude 48 degrees of the climacteric. The latitude, he said, there'd be a great in the peak of July, a great scorching of the earth from the sun. The fire in the sky, and in the terminology of what he's talking about, that is the latitude where all the major grain fields of the northern hemisphere are. So that's just one of his many, and he talks about global famine being something that comes in regions here and there and then suddenly becomes universal across the planet. And he describes a situation that could literally be a breakdown of the food system which kills 2 out of every 3 of us in his prophecies. And it seems to be triggered by, if you look at the general tone of it, if there's wars, they're wars that are triggered by climate change than the other way around. And it's for the warmer.
Okay. Since you got into the oracle there, I still think it's a little unclear to a lot of us if the oracle is, a physical entity, a living entity. Could you tell us a little bit about what the oracle is?
The oracle is simply a utilitarian term that I give to something that cannot be termed, that cannot be
come from a meditative state, for example, or?
The oracle simply doesn't exist, because if it did exist, it would be in the way of itself. Mm-hmm. If, I suppose, if you like, it comes from the region of the Turiya, is what the Sanskrit scholars just simply call the fourth state. They don't even give it a name, or it's just a state that cannot be named. It is something that doesn't happen, and it does this not happening in such a pure way because it does not exist. Because to exist, even nothingness, is a state of mind existence. It is, if you think, I'm going into the void. Well, the void is a concept. What if there's realities that are underneath those concepts that are not concepts whatsoever, and therefore do not exist as the mind projects existence to be? It is from there that these predictions come, and if I am in my trap of existence getting enough out of the way of them in this experience which has absolutely nothing happening when it happens, I just simply start writing that, or it's just simply there. It's like no big Nostradamus climbing the walls like in the movies or anything like that. It's a non-event, because event is concept of mind, and that gets in the way. So it is not a ritual magic. It's not doing trances. It's not even doing meditation, although I believe that it is meditation that's the key in the doorway to all of these non-existing greater realities that underpin us. And I do think meditation is a way, a very deep way, to open the key and look beyond the door, beyond doors in existence.
Well, it's pretty well known that a lot of psychic functioning, to try to do it, you have to get your conscious mind out of the way.
But your unconscious mind also has to be out of the way. In fact, mind as such is the problem.
Yes.
It has, and then who is going to take them out of the way is more mind. So nothing can be done. This is the big trick. That's why a lot of psychic stuff psychic readings are really people regurgitating their subconscious mind, which the subconscious and the collective unconscious does have a connection to these things, but it often is filled with traffic and noise from the subconscious, because what I'm saying is nothing can be done to be available for this or it. Nothing can be done. And strangely enough, there requires a great effortless effort to reach a point where nothing is put aside, because to put aside means something is putting it aside, which is continuing. All of that gain has to be simply watched like someone else's movie, and then, without then being a point in it, there is a thing that is not a thing that can reveal itself when the other things have calmed down.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Getting back to your book and for 2014, are there any things you would like to go into? I mean, there's a lot going on in Europe, France, for example, this kind of Dieudonné and political movement, the philosopher Alain Sorel, and all kinds of things. And then, of course, Russia with Putin. Any comments on France and Russia?
Yes, I have a new section in the book called Readings for Regions and Nations, where it's kind of in the center of the book, where I look at things that are not specific to the essays of other chapters and take a walk through prophecy through all these different places. There's a number of things. The biggest subject in that chapter is about the rise of nationalism as a kind of a last spurting candle before it flames out. Many times in history, things look like they're returning when actually they're just having a final flurry before they exhaust themselves. And nationalism in Europe is rising again. The Parliament of Europe is probably going to have upwards of 20% of neo-fascist right-wing parties returning to power. Marine Le Pen, I foresee, will be a future president of France. And I think the May elections also in France are going to see a sizable 12 to 18, maybe 20% of the seats of Parliament in Paris will also have more right-of-center anti-immigration waves of political populism. So that is some of the things that are happening. Europe was also an extensive subject of predictions for 2013, 2014, and how it's tied to America astrologically. And the European Union, like American health care, is one of these things that will never end. It will have to, though, go back to the drawing board a few times. The euro monetary system will collapse because it does not sustain itself. But Europe as a concept, every time when the Europeans feel like they're going to break off and go back into their national units, they're going to be confronted with what 1914 showed them and what 1939 showed them, that this most blood-soaked continent in the history of humanity cannot go back to those kinds of lifestyles. It has to move forward. It is the same for America and its health care. I foresaw Obamacare passing at a time in the end of 2009 when everybody universally saw it was doomed and dead in the Senate. I said it would be passed in March of 2010. It was, but I said it would come into birth as a misshapen monster that would take 20 years to fix, and eventually somebody else, another president, would have to have their name tabbed on it, like a Hillary Clare or a Bush Care, Jeb Care, in the next presidential cycle, because they're going to find out, as the Europeans have to find out with the European Union. You must follow your rules and make it a merit. You have to have steps of meritocracy to allow new members to come in. They have to have a balanced budget. They have to have a viable economy. They have to have laws that are up to the standards of the courts of Europe. They cannot just be snuck in rapidly without these things sorted out. So Europe is going to have to be like a tree that's in a drought that has to slough off juice to certain parts that will die off and fall off so that the core tree will survive. And when it does survive, strangely enough, I see England will probably leave the European Union, but Germany, as always, will be the center, the dynamo that runs continental Europe, but it will lean more towards Russia than towards the West.
What about Russia? What do you see going on down there?
Russia is still on track to fulfill Edgar Cayce's famous prophecy of being the hope of the world, which is a strange thing to say when one considers that it has a neo-czar as its leader, President Putin. However,
but he's a good czar.
He is a good czar, and frankly, Russia needs a czar for now. And this czar is a second Peter the Great, meaning that in his long reign, he will bring Russia truly into its new modern identity. And perhaps with the help of the United States, which is what Casey foretold right during the peak of the Red Scares in the latter half of the 1920s when he started making these predictions. He said that, it won't be Bolshevism. He said that the Bolshevistic Russia you see in the 1920s is not the hope that I'm talking about. It is after that. America can help that Russia, which I foresee he foresaw as the hope of the world. And Russia has a unique position in the world. It straddles the East and the West. So it can become, in its concept of the near abroad, its interest in what surrounds it, it can become a balancing agent. It already, through Putin, stopped a ruinous war in Syria with NATO and Obama going into Syria to render it into another Libya, only with far more dire consequences, such as a 30 years war in the Islamic world between the Sunnis and the Shias. Just an aside here that religions have a life cycle just like people. Islam is at the same age that Christianity was in its life cycle when they had the 30 Years' War and the other wars of religion from the late 1500s through to the mid-1600s. Islam is as old as Christianity was then now. And Islam has a great danger of seeing the minority Shia and the majority Sunni sects go to war with each other like the Protestants and the Catholics did in Middle Europe. You would see it then in the middle of Middle East. Unfortunately, I predicted that by August you would see the mainstream news would recognize that civil war had returned to Iraq, neighboring Iraq, which it has. And so Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon become the battleground, like the Palatinate and Bohemia of the 30 Years' War of the Christians. And Obama, thanks to Vladimir Putin, was stopped from stepping into a real mess, although there's still the danger that a war with Iran in 2016 might do the same. So Putin is, despite the fact that he's a dictator, is a good dictator. And I can say these things because I can look at these things beyond my own political biases and look at the bigger picture, even if it goes against my own personal choices. I mean, I would never live under Vladimir Putin. But as a facilitator of this oracular work, I am given the message that he's actually one of the greater leaders alive right now in the world.
Well, for sure. You can make that argument. The living standards and all kinds of social statistics are dramatically better than in his early days when he took over. The country was sort of in a state of collapse, and it's been basically prospering fairly well. But, again, a lot of us like a little bit more freedom, and we can argue that that's a drawback, and so we wouldn't want to live there. But what about anything else in terms of a play-out from what I guess you would say America and Europe? Do you see Europe the EU breaking away from the U.S.? If
the cycle of fascism returns, which is highly likely.
In which? Europe or America? Oh, okay.
We'll start with Europe. If political populism goes to the right and further to the right, the strange thing that will happen again is that a right-wing Europe will look eastward, just like Hitler did to the Soviet Union, only this time not in warfare, but in economics, move farther eastward to embrace economically China. And that would then pull Europe away. That's why it's so key that this free trade agreement between Europe and America happens. It's the last thread that could keep America connected to Europe, because Europe is being pulled towards China more than to Europe, to us right now. to the United States. America certainly also is undergoing, basically to answer something you asked earlier, 1914 was not the 1914-1918 4 years was the mortal wounding of the British Empire, even though it survived the war and actually technically won, was one of the winners. And by doing so lasted about 30 more years in empire. And America is in a similar situation where the axis shift is happening. And the strangest source of this shift, where America is going to lose its position as a superpower in the next 4 years or so, is actually coming from Edward Snowden, of all people. It's going to be understood in the future that what Edward Snowden did as a whistleblower, whether one agrees with what he did or not, has set in motion a shift in the information media revolution away from the matrix of servers that run the World Wide Web being situated in the Mecca of America. Because of what has been revealed by the NSA spying, the world has awoken to it, and you will find that servers will be built outside of America, and in 4 short years, America will have to go through servers outside of America to contact the rest of the world because of what Snowden's revealed. So this shift is more than just an internet. Internet is really a lightning rod or a crystal ball, if you will, or some divinatory tool to see what's coming next. What starts happening in the information revolution is what eventually starts to spread into other systems. Encrypted information will also create encrypted money. And one of the more bold prophecies of the 2013 book was that Bitcoin would emerge as the first of a real set of workable, eventually, in 2 years' time, and cryptocurrencies that would redefine 5,000 years of bartering and economy, and be, to some extent, the cause of the collapse of the fiat economy in 2016. But the good news is it collapses because there are better options, just like the collapse of the horse and buggy business in the turn of the century when the internal combustion engine came into view. Of course, it'll have its problems, just like the automobile has problems in our world today. But it is the next big step. And the metaphor for all your listeners to conceive with the way the world is going through changes is that not only are we possibly reviewing, in essence, what happened in 1914. But what happened in the first 14 years of the 20th century is also paralleling the first 14 years of the 21st. Is that we are seeing technologies that are changing our lifestyles. They're hitting less in industry and more in our way we communicate to each other, in the information revolution. But these are now starting to literally turn the record business, the publishing business, the news dissemination businesses. These are the old horse and buggy driven technologies that now e-books and electronic information gathering and sharing is changing. It's also breaking the borders. It's when currency, it literally in 4 years could see banks become, the Roman facades of banks become the Roman ruins, the newest Roman ruins of a bygone day. We will not, within a decade, if not in 4 years or more, we will not have banks like we have now. We will soon not have power grids that are centralized when certain breakthroughs in technology give us little boxes that can actually power our businesses and our houses separate from other systems. When Wi-Fi becomes so dominant that the era of the ugly power poles that started in the 1880s and 70s to this day, you'll start seeing all those ugly, sightless, eyesore power poles all over the world be torn down, because it's a technology system that's gone horse and buggy on us.
Yes, well, some look at past revolutionary periods as being not really countries, but being forces like the World War I period was the bankers finally putting out of their misery the nobility in a lot of countries, smashing the kings and all that, and taking full control. And then some are arguing that we're now watching the rise of technocracy as technical forces. Those who control those cell phone networks or whatever are going to be more powerful than the bankers.
But it's deeper than that. It's a cycle.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's part of that. But it's deeper. That what I foresee is that you have, the more the future changes, the more it looks the same. If you can read from the literal to the essential, the literal will change its costumes and its pretenses. For instance, 250 years ago, roughly, when Pluto was transiting Capricorn last time, you had the crystallization of the aristocracy of the world of that time, which was based on blue bloods, and they controlled the power and the army and the politics. There also was an emerging of middle classes in Europe and the 13 colonies of the British American colonies. And when those colonies of upwardly mobile and profitable people started profiting the empire to a point where they wanted to be, the king wanted to tax them for the previous wars that were fought in their favor, there was a tax rebellion, similar to what happened during the transit of Pluto back into Capricorn recently, with even named it the Tea Party Rebellion in the United States. It has not yet morphed into a more solid revolution, politically disciplined, but it is the beginning of a repetition of an emergent rebellion against a new aristocracy which is crystallizing in our times, which is what I call the CE oligarchy. It is where those, rather than bloodlines, it's your bottom line that dictates at a certain rate of wealth your aristocracy over others. And you will use technocrats and technology. You will use these things that you're talking about, which are the tools of that. But the heart of it is a new class of plutocrats that are also divided by nations like they were 250 years ago. I mean, there were French aristocrats fighting British aristocrats and so forth. There's the Chinese cabal of CE oligarchs who are trying to persuade the world and force the world into their idea of a mix of communal capitalism as a new system. It doesn't have freedom, but it's ordered and it works. And because it's from above, command economy, they can create wonders like build an interstate in less than 5 years when it took us a quarter century through democracy. And they're actually openly saying, you like your freedoms, but your freedoms give you chaos. And at one point you will want our order over your freedom and its chaos. And this is a great struggle that's going on between those who, in the forces of democracy, who want to continue to have freedom but are having to deal with the chaos, and those who want order at the price of no freedom. This is the next great East-West struggle after the communists and the free market, free world and the communist world kind of morphed into our current times. It's the same in some ways, and it's not.
John, I've got an interest in a topic that you just kind of got into, and that is the issue of the massive development of Central Asia. And this gets back into peace with Iran, and it gets into Russia and China. But, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote his book called The Grand Chessboard, and he was basically arguing that controlling Central Asia is pretty much going to lead to control of the world, more or less, at some point. Yeah. And, China and Russia are building all these high-speed and heavy rail networks and pipelines and everything else. So it's going to be very quick and easy to get from China to Russia into Western Europe over all these networks and into Turkey and so on. And so what do you see, broadly speaking, for that whole development area, India and above, Kazakhstan, that whole... Because I think that's a lot of what the fight is about. Afghanistan, Iran, a lot of it was for control of those resources.
I respect Brzezinski, but I will go on record as saying the future will view him wrong. He's looking at it from an old empire, from an old 20th century point of view. He's looking at it almost from a British point of view when the British tried to take in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a dead end, and I would actually say that, and I'm kind of shocked because it's really going against my own personal opinions, but the Oracle tells me that we are out of there. If not by 2014, by 2015 for sure. The West is gone from Afghanistan, and what was actually freaking out a lot of the warmongers and war business people is that the Middle East is too rapidly in their economic plan, becoming not really a place to do business. And the new market, the Western Pacific, the containment of China, is coming on to them too soon before they're ready to exploit the military-industrial complex advantages of causing friction with China. They were hoping to do that more in the 20s. This is coming too fast. So I appreciate his point of view, but actually Central Asia is not the issue. Now, India is not Central Asia. That is South Asia. And India with China is an interesting subject that is a parallel again to Pluto's transit the last time around with middle classes. We are now seeing from that area in this new transit, not only do aristocracies begin to fall in this 250-year cycle, but middle classes morph into their new evolutions. Right now, the U.S. and European middle classes, which were the first, are now in a midlife crisis. But all around them are emergent middle classes, especially in China and Southeast Asia and South Asia, that are the new repetition of open, upwardly mobile, economically profitable people by the hundreds of millions joining the economic system, that will also, they're initially appreciated by their governments, but soon they're going to become a kind of a baby that can't be controlled because they want freedom. They want, the things that come with free markets that are anathema, really, to control freaks and totalitarian systems like the one Beijing is trying to sustain over this success of the four modernizations of Deng Xiaoping. And has reached now to this pinnacle of success. They now, in 2014, are quite freaked out about it and are wanting to actually slow it down and control it and take out the very Western ideas that made it possible. And I have a whole chapter about that in this new book, Predictions for 2014, because now the Chinese want to stop. They want to play King George with their own people. And eventually that's going to lead to the collapse of communism in China. India always will find India's biggest problem has to be the sorting out of Kashmir to some at least disagreeable resolution with Pakistan, because the danger of a regional nuclear war between those two nuclear powers is very high between now and the early 2020s. And given that, since I lived there many years and was there during some of the other border clashes that almost led to a thermonuclear war, it is shocking to see the people of India and Pakistan repeat those silent movies of people in August 1914 cranked up a little faster than natural by the old antiquated cameras, all marching off with flowers in their gun holes and their gun barrels with their women and their families arm in arm, and we're just going to march blissfully off and home by Christmas. And I see the same kind of attitude of demonstrations, especially when the BJP party in India, which is a right-wing fascist Hindu supremacist party, who kind of think that if there's a thermonuclear war with Pakistanis, it'll just be as bad as an Indian natural disaster and everything will be fine. This kind of naivety that was around in 1914 concerns me when I see it move from Europe this time around and permeate the people of the East. the demonstrations of nationalism against Japanese that happened by the millions in China that got rarely reported in the United States is a significant concern to me, because it's the kind of nationalistic aspirations. And my Japanese readers will also tell you that that similar thing is rising in Japan. It's the kind of thing that could see the world wake up tomorrow morning with a war between China and Japan dragging the United States into it, just like Britain was dragged into World War I by the Germans invading Brussels, which they had, or Belgium, which they had a alliance with Belgium. So that even though the English didn't even want to get into World War I, they suddenly found themselves in World War I. America could be dragged into a war over the Senkaku Islands, or the Spratly, or whatever silly piece of coral that the Chinese wanted to claim as theirs, so they can control the sea routes into the South China and China Seas, which I understand their reasons for that. So I look at Britain and Germany in 1914 as the big superpower on the block and the up-and-coming superpower of Germany, and the fact that both the American fleet is now had some competition in an arms race with the Chinese are trying to create aircraft carrier systems and expand their navy, just like the Germans tried to do with dreadnoughts and battleships in the 1914. Could very well see, and back then too, people used to say, you will never see a war between these two nations. They're too intertwined economically. How can Germans and English really fight a war because of all these economic connections? Well, actually, the similar thing is happening with China and America. We are very much connected. They have a lot of our debt in their banks. But we could actually see the same thing unexpectedly happen from 2014 on into the 2020s is through a clash of some nationalistic fever causing the Western Pacific War.
Okay, but wouldn't that be a big war?
What context to what?
Well, when I asked earlier about a great war coming.
Great meaning what?
Okay, great meaning like World War. So this wouldn't be a world war. This would be a smaller one.
Well, it's what was the World War, but in World War I's case, it was a tripwire of all these different agreements where the people, in their stupidity for 40 years of peace, thought that if they completely crowded Europe with arms and armies that could be mobilized overnight, that the mutual fear of mutually assured destruction of all these people tripwiring one tripwire or another from the Central Powers to the powers that were around them, that's why everybody would keep the peace. If there were so many guns around, nobody would want to shoot one. Of course, it always happens that somebody shoots one off, and then tripwires are tripped, and suddenly everybody in Europe, who are all the powers of the world centralized, found themselves in a war that nobody wanted. Within a few short months of Franz Ferdinand, the heir of the Austrian Empire, being shot by Gavrilo Princip in Bosnia. A minor assassin in a corner of one of the more geriatric empires of Europe caused a global conflict. Now, would that happen in China? I think not, because China, I keep talking about it. I had a whole chapter that ended my Iran book called The Money Bomb. And it is a unique way that could stop war in Iran if America pursues it with Israel, or it can happen if there's a conflict between China and America. The issue is that if there's conflict, China will then demand, once it has its own separate reserve currency, which it is working towards having by 2015. That's why China has 8,000 tons of gold collected. They are trying to rival Fort Knox in the United States for a gold reserve. So they're looking at something that we will see some kind of a gold standard returning once this mess from 1971, this fiat upon credit, boom, bubble, bust economy that we're in now, like, where we print monopoly funny money that is not actually backed by anything except promissory bonds that keeps kicking it down the road when somehow something makes everything better, and then everybody just lives off debt. a debt that's actually $40 trillion of private debt in the United States of its citizens and $15 trillion debt of its public funds and its government. Nobody here in this country talks about the $40 trillion of debt that the private citizens have through living off their credit cards and other means. But anyway, that's another subject. But this is not a subject that goes unnoticed by the Chinese, and they are foresightful in the ways in which they may prevent a war or stop a war in its tracks by literally saying, okay, we're going to demand you pay the debt of the $500 billion that we owe, that we're holding. And of course, the thing is, the Americans say, well, if you do that, we may go down today, but you're going down tomorrow because our economies are so intertwined. But you see, the way this works is it's just the threat of doing that would cause markets to tumble, and it would cause pressure, political pressure in Washington to stop a war rather than see who's going to blink first in this pay up or shut up kind of situation that the Chinese will use once they are assured of their own reserve currency, that it's enacted and in competition with the U.S. reserve currency. I mean, as far back as December 2005, I predicted that when a certain man named Bernanke would be elected he was elected, but his tenure as the Federal Reserve Secretary would see him use the printing press and literally print the United States dollar out of value, ultimately to where it is no longer and forever will never be the preeminent reserve currency of the world. And unfortunately, that prophecy is 100% accurate, it seems. We were heading straight for that. And his replacement is basically Bernanke in a dress. Yellen is not going to change course. And the quantitative easing that she's going to have to do will see a downturn in April through May, and if not then, at another period of time, October through November. It's important for everybody listening that these are the two periods of 2014 to be mindful of for a number of issues related to wars, Middle East, China, and especially economics. There's certain windows during the Grand Cross astrologically happening on Easter, which is also happening on the anniversary of Hitler's birthday, the 20th of April, that are going to be those moments in time, April through May, where you wake up and the whole world has changed. Kind of 1914 style moments or 1918 style moments where suddenly the Kaiser's gone, and so is the Austrian Emperor, and they've resigned, and a lot of minor kings, and the Ottoman Empire, which had been around for 600 years, gone. That kind of stuff could begin happening as soon as April through May, and even more so in October through November, especially because of another person that I'm going to say something rather unpopular with a lot of viewers and listeners. But if you want to look at the source of the problem of the Middle East, look to the Prime Minister of Israel. He is a very powerful and charismatically unconscious force that is threatening to lead Israel into an adventure with the blessings of Saudi Arabia, who will allow Israel's jets to fly over Arabian airspace to attack probably the Iraq heavy water installation in central Iran, to make the point to end what they believe, what his government believes, although a lot in the Secret Service of Israel, Mossad, including the former head, Nir Dagan, it says the Iranians do not have atomic weapons. This whole adventure to seek to strike Iran could be something that happens in April through May or October through November. It was said by a reader of HogueProphecy.com today. She wanted me to comment on the fact that there are I think, 4 red moons, full moons this year, all happening during the 4 holy days of the Jewish calendar. And she asked, what does that mean? I said, well, it could be a coincidence, or I would say more likely it is a portent that one should take seriously that that Israel, under the command of Netanyahu, is heading for disaster. If he is somehow allowed to start this war that he has been fomenting and projecting for so long, the good news is that there's a lot of people in Israel that are not on his side. He nearly lost his election, only winning Likud for 1 seat from Lapid and a centrist movement. You see, a lot of people don't understand. I talk about it in predictions for 2013. There was a Israeli spring that didn't even get reported by the U.S. news. Maybe you heard it in Europe, but in America, hardly anyone even knew of the hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating up and down the streets of Tel Aviv about housing issues that have been not addressed by the Likud-based governments because they're putting all the extra financing into establishing 500,000 apartments for 500,000 people in the West Bank. This has been overlooked by the American press, which is pro-Zionist Israeli, not pro-secular Israeli, which still has a slight majority in the country of Israel, that were protesting these adventures. So he wanted to strike in October of 2012, and he was stopped by even the former head of Mossad coming forth in public, never done before, and basically said this whole theory of Iran is idiotic. It is not going to happen, and as long as he can't get a committee of people to make this happen, it's going to happen from other means. It's going to have to happen from something that I think was attempted through Syria, to create a false attack blamed on the Syrian regime that was supposed to actually drag Israel into the war in Syria, and then things lead to Iran and so forth. We dodged that bullet in August of last year, and that gives me hope that sometimes when certain things that are future potentials that are fueled by the collective stupidity of people rolling like a mob down one pathway through time, even then a slight little joke or mistake in calculation can also favor a positive solution and an alternative future, which is what happened. We were at the brink of war in August of last year in the Middle East that could have gone very bad very quickly, and now we have some time and some breath, and people of peace are having an attempt at changing things for the better. But one last thing on this train of thought. In the new book, 2014, I look again at a famous prophecy of Nostradamus, one of his most famous in enigmatic terms, this word called Raypoz, R-A-Y-P-O-Z. It's all in uppercase letters, even in his 16th century script. And I've always wondered what it meant, because he talks about flee, everyone in Geneva from Raypoz. He will take finances and turn it into the iron of weapons. And it talks about treaties being broken, and something called Raypoz will take its revenge on the people of Geneva. Now, in earlier times, people used to think this was Nostradamus railing again at John Calvin, who he was against. But as time goes by, it looks like those indications go nowhere, whereas more and more, if you look at Geneva as a place in Europe where the United Nations has its base, other than in New York, then the people of Geneva are the peacemakers that here and now, as we are taping this, and I'm sure even more so when this show is on later in January, when we're coming close to the Geneva gathering of the Syrians, the Iranians, the Americans, and the Europeans to resolve the Syrian issue, the Syrian civil war, that we will be that is coming more and more in my mind now as an event that's been foreseen by prophecy gets closer and closer to its time in the present. often the clues become clearer. It's almost like it's like you're seeing something in a blur from the distance, and then when it comes into your range of vision, you can see it clearly, more and more with each second as it comes towards you. And I feel that Rapaz is undergoing, this prophecy of Rapaz, and Nostradamus is undergoing this, related directly to Rapaz being the answer, the revenge, the tool, the thing, or person under that code name that will take revenge for what will happen that will cause the peacemakers to leave Geneva quickly. And so what is Rapaz? Rapaz, I've always felt, is an anagram, a wordplay for the name for the Iraqi atomic weapons reactor, test reactor that the Israelis bombed with jets that were meant to be given to the Iranians under the Shah of Iran, but were given to the Israelis, who they then used those F-15s to bomb Osirak, which was a acronym created by the French, who created the test reactor that Saddam Hussein was going to use to eventually tip his Scud missiles with nuclear warheads to attack Israel. Israel rightfully preempted that by attacking the reactor before it was turned on, right when it was completed, and destroyed it. But the revenge of the Islamic bomb, which the aspirations of nuclear weapons, is I think in some way, I feel like the image of whatever that thing is in the future coming closer to my view is becoming clearer and clearer what this enigma is, that Rapaz has something to do with I think in this case, the illusion that Iran has a nuclear weapon that precipitates a rash move by Israel, either openly or surreptitiously through false flag events like a possible fake chemical weapons attack in Syria, that whatever way it happens, even if it's a vote in the Congress of the United States, sabotages peace, gets the warmongers back on their market schedule to arm and sequester Iran in 2014, 2015, and then attack it and commit the final regime change of a plan that originally was drafted 2 weeks after 9/11, that Wesley Clark, a Democratic, was in the campaign to run for president back then, who also was former NATO commander, was told and went public with it that 2 weeks after 9/11, he went to the Pentagon to talk to some of his men who are now part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They collared him and went into a private room and told him that we're going to war with Iraq. And he was like saying, why Iraq? Had they anything to do with 9/11? They go, no. Well, why are we going to Iraq? Because it was the Al-Qaeda and those people. I guess they just don't know how to, the general said, I guess they don't know how to fight wars like that. They know how to do the big armies and tanks, and we're planning a war for Iraq. And then a couple of weeks later, he went there and he asked, well, how's everything going? He says, oh, it's a lot worse, said the general. And he said, look at this memo from Rumsfeld. It's not just Iraq anymore. We're going to take down 6 or 7 countries: Somalia, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, and Libya, and Lebanon with the Hezbollah, as part of this agenda to take down rogue regimes that we want to take down so we can strategically control the oil in the Middle East. Now, in the Iran book, I started from 1992 and took the reader through a walk through all the manifestos of the neoconservative movement, which very, very clearly look at a strategic view that would keep America as a major hegemonic force in the world after the fall of the Soviet Union. And they had a very step-by-step process, a philosophy of taking down all these regimes that a lot of them have something in common. They don't believe in central banking, and they got frustrated with petrodollars and wanted to create a new system that had another currency. Saddam Hussein wanted to do that. The Iranians are wanting to do that. Libya wanted to do that. Notice how all of these are going down one by one. Or if they're vassals to others. For instance, Syria and Hezbollah are allied to Iran. this is a strategic move, and it has its adherents in both the Democrat and Republican parties of the United States. And a lot of kind of blind-eyed blue Democrats in this country think that Barack Obama is not intrigued by this concept. But every American president takes hegemony first and party persuasion second, and I've seen over a period of time, unfortunately, a string of predictions about Obama that are showing that he is more and more inclined to embrace the neoconservative idea, which is directly linked to the neo-Zionist or Zionist supremacist movement that I talk about, where many of the neocons that wrote policy papers for the White House and Washington during the Bush and Obama years are the same people with dual citizenship in Israel that also write papers for the Knesset and the Mossad and the Israeli Prime Minister. So it is a cabal of two like-minded allies trying to dominate the Middle East situation because of fossil fuel needs. And it's coming to a head in 2016.
Well, John, there's another side to this, though. There was a quote by the famous boxer Mike Tyson. Somebody asked him about his opponent's plans, and he said, "Everybody's got his plans, but it doesn't count for much once you hit him in the face."
You know, he has a great show in Las Vegas, and he's an amazing guy, Mike Tyson. There's a lot more there than meets the eye or the tattoo on his face. This guy is a very interesting guy, has an original mind, and yes, that is always or put it in another famous quote, the best laid plans of mice and men.
Exactly.
And, you know,
and I've seen interviews of Putin where he's essentially saying, and he's talking about, fortunately, we, funded to the max our missile program over the last 10 years so that little adventures in places like the Middle East, kind of have to respect Russia.
Well, in fact, deeper into that theme is something that echoes 1914, is that we have a situation, if there's a war, if there's a naval conflict where a deep water U.S. carrier task force or two goes into the shallow pond that is the Persian Gulf, they will be in uncharted military theory with their modern weapons that have not been fired in anger or in vast numbers in any, just similar to what has happened in 40 years after the Franco-Prussian War to the European modern armies. No one had, by the time World War I came into being, some of the generals had fought in the Franco-Prussian War, but everybody else didn't know. There hadn't been a major war in Europe in 40 years, but there had been a huge advance in military technology. They were all entering World War I dressed in their nice 1870s style red pants and blue and light blue khakis and plumes and marching shoulder to shoulder like they were marching 40 years earlier in almost Napoleonic fashion into Maxim machine guns and Krupp heavy artillery and gas and planes and things that totally altered. The tactics had not changed to match the technologies. And I think that if there is a war in 2015, 2016, the U.S. Navy will get into the Persian Gulf thinking and acting as if this was a Cold War or World War II situation, that kind of mindset dealing with the very technology that Russia will provide and is providing, the Chinese are providing to the Iranians. For instance, a anti-ballistic ship missile the Chinese have perfected. They already have them for their own army, and they're perfecting more for Iran that literally will allow you to launch an anti-ballistic missile into space and will come down at Mach 16 and hit a carrier and break its back. Just one missile. It will come in at Mach 16, and there's basically no one knows for sure if the systems that we have in defense the United States has can actually work fast enough to blow that missile out of the sky before it sinks the carriers. So you have a situation where the capital ship of modern military, the U.S. carrier, which is what is the basis for U.S. power around the world are 12 carrier task forces. Many of we always have 4 or 5 of them roving the world. The carrier in one day could be rendered obsolete by the first Chinese-style, Russian-style hypersonic missile, or like the Yakut missile family, or the Mosquito or Sizzlers that come at 15 feet above the water at Mach 3. You launch those, and also do what the Iranians will probably do, is launch a wave of 300 Echoset missiles, which are subsonic, but just the number that the radars and technology will have to try to encounter and erase will be perhaps overwhelming, because the stupid thing about this idea is the radar shield over a deep water navy is like a shield that's held by a warrior. It's invisible, but it marks the access of the direction of missiles coming your way and blocks and gives you time to shoot them down over the horizon. They call it fighting. If there's a war, a naval conflict over the Strait of Hormuz, which Nostradamus actually named as a place of war of the Ishmaelites called Hamara, which is actually the old name in the 16th century for the Iranian half of the shore of the Strait of Hormuz. If this happens, there could very well, he talks about ships being melted and sunk by the Trident. Now, the Trident could be, the Trident Pala could mean a couple of things. It could mean the American Navy is melted by missiles. Even conventional missiles, like anti-ballistic missiles, could actually cause fires that would cause melting, because a lot of our ships are composite. They're not made of steel anymore. It could mean nuclear. It could mean the Tridantal could be the melting of the suicidal attack of little boats coming out of the Strait of Hormuz to attack the American fleet. That is melted and sunk. It could mean the symbol, that strange red abstract symbol in the white field of the trident of the Iranian modern flag, is actually an abstract of the Iranian red tulip that grows over the graves of martyrs, Shahid, in holy war. And it is written in it, there's a sword in the center of it, and it's actually an abstract for Allah in a rose abstract. If you notice that part of it, which is contingent, that is contiguous, that does not have parts that are just floating off of it, it's a trident. So is Nostradamus talking about Le Tridentau being the people who melt the fleet, being the Iranians? Is the fleet that he also mentions in his prophecies, which is called the True Serpent? The True Serpent is perhaps a code name for the flag that runs on all U.S. naval ships since a year after 9/11, and will continue to run on the ships as the Navy Jack until the War on Terror is somehow officially over. That is the red and yellow flag of 13 red and yellow stripes with a snake uncoiled straight across it, slithering, and underneath which it says, "Don't tread on me," which is the Tea Party symbol of today, and it was also an early flag of the American Revolution. This is the True Serpent.
Well, that's awfully interesting. A question on this. You know, a lot of political watchers today are thinking that Saudi Arabia may turn into the outcast, kind of the bad guy, as the U.S. Kind of brings Iran in from the cold and all that. This is assuming we don't have a war over there, right? Do you see any of that? Do you see, I mean, just looking at the news, you can see Saudi Arabia is being painted in more and more of a negative light.
Well, and what no one dares to do, because, especially in this country, because of the Jewish lobby, the Israelis lobby, I would say technically the Zionist lobby is so strong that no one dares to say that. Actually, what I will say is not just Saudi Arabia, but this is what's so unfortunate, that Israel itself may find itself as much a pariah as Iran has been, with sanctions, with issues. I've been writing about this since 1994, that some over excessive badly misjudged move by Israel that triggers a war with Iran could find Israel quite compromised. And being that it is actually a rogue nuclear state in the region and not a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it brings a much more tense situation of a country that may have 200 to 500 nuclear weapons, some of them thermonuclear, being isolated by the world, that is rightfully traumatized by what happened for the reason the Jewish state was formed, to give Jewish people a safe place where they could protect and live and be left alone by all the Gentiles that periodically try to eradicate them or throw them out of countries. Worst of which was those other Aryans, those blonde Aryans that tried with Hitler to do that in Europe. And the Israeli right-wing hawks look at the Iranians. A lot of people probably listening to this show think that Iranians are Arabs. They are Iran. The Iranian name, Iran, means from the land of the Aryans. It is the homeland of the Aryan race, and these dark-skinned and black-haired Aryans, the Israeli right-wing hawks look at them as if they're the same as the crazy blonde ones in Europe, and that they're threatening Israel in the same way, which is not true. For one thing, for whatever the faults of the Iranian Persian people, one thing that they have as a legacy is they are not a society that periodically self-destructs. They are the only other nation that has lasted in some form or another as a united nation of Persians to Iranians for 3,000 years. The only other nation older than them is Egypt. So these people, by their conditioning national identity, culture, and programming, are people who last, people who do not push things to a point of self-destruction, unlike their cousins in Germany, who have done it more than once, the 30 Years' War being the first time where Germany nearly destroyed itself, the German states that were pitted and divided between Protestant and Catholic. And the second 30 Years' War, which started in 1914 with a 20-year pause and ended in 1945, is the other German 30 Years' War, which nearly destroyed the country. The other thing I would say to the Israeli people is look back at your own past conditionings as a people identified in the construct of being Israeli. You see, just a little aside here so that people don't think I'm a raving anti-Semite or racist. I contend that people are born into societies where they take on a collectively embraced point of view of the people that they are born into, the culture, the religion. Anyone born into any different culture, if you were born in Pakistan right now and you were a woman, you would be wearing a chador, you would be following the Islamic Sharia law, because that's the only option you have in your conditioning unless the world gets beyond these mindsets and constructs. So when I'm going after an Israeli point of view or an Islamic fundamentalist point of view or an American fundamentalist point of view, I'm going against a conditioning that has cloaked the soul into a certain kind of illusion. And so I am anti the illusion, not the people that call themselves Jews, Muslims, blacks, whites, Americans. And so just to get that clear for some of you, because I know a lot of people misunderstand me when I'm saying things like this. But what I am saying, too, is that if you study the conditioning of peoples, you will see patterns that are good and patterns that are not so good for the future of a collective mindset. And one thing you notice in biblical history is that the different evolutions of the Jewish people from Hebrews to Judah to the kingdom of Judah and Israel and so forth is a cyclical buildup of arrogance followed by biblical punishment from God, if you will, but in a secular sense, that there's a kind of an auto-suicidal pattern that happens like the Germans, that also happens to Jewish cultures of the past, that sees them scattered and banished or destroyed, the diasporas, the Babylonian captivity, and that concerns me when I see a man like Netanyahu fomenting such a dangerous adventure if he attacks Iran. Could very well see the next version of the Babylonian captivity, the fall of the kingdom of Judah to the Babylonians, and so forth, because of a cultural predilection to do things that self-destruct the society, requiring it to rebuild itself again in cyclic ways. And so I actually see the nerviest, most dangerous collective mindset in the Middle East right now is coming from Israel, and not from its neighbors so much, and not from Iran, which is actually in the long run will be seen as the more rational player in this difficult situation.
Yes, and then you've got these other wild cards like the Saudis, and so it's just one big mess waiting to blow up.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about the Saudis because I do in the books, and the Saudis are terrified of what could happen if the Shia people who live in their own country, as well as neighboring Bahrain, should rebel against their Sunni overlords and sheiks. Bahrain is a major. Saudis have sent their army into Bahrain to aid the Sunni sheikh to suppress. It's hardly getting noticed in American press here, to suppress the ongoing Arab Spring that is going on with the Shia majority in that little Gulf country. The northeastern province of Saudi Arabia, where most of the oil is drilled, has a majority population of Shia. And so the issue of getting Iran, keeping Iran from spreading and being a dominant power in the Middle East is a very important strategic issue for the Saudi King Abdullah and whoever will be his successor. And what is also interesting in this, and I go into this at length in the Iran book, there is a rich wealth of apocalyptic prophecies in the Islamic religion that hardly ever gets addressed in the West. And there is an apocalypse fever going on, and especially in the Shia areas. I mean, most of us, poor dumb Westerners, if you ever watch the former president of Iran get up and speak to the United Nations, he used to say a prayer at the beginning of the United Nations speech every time he came there. And in that prayer, I studied it and found out in Farsi that basically he was invoking the soon-to reappear 12th and final Imam, the Mahdi, to from his long occultation, to reemerge into the world and lead the world to salvation. And if you understand Islamic prophecies, the prophecies of Muhammad that were written in the Hadith, his longer version of conversations and how he interpreted the laws of the Quran. It's not the Quran, it's another scripture. In the Hadith, he talks directly about how the black flags of a holy war would come out of Khorasan. Khorasan is the ancient name of Afghanistan and eastern Iran. And that many people watching the black flags of Al-Qaeda are in the Islamic world wonder, even if they don't agree with it, they wonder if these black flags of jihadists coming out of the regions of Khorasan are actually the fulfillment of the prophecy that will lead to a vast sea of black flags in a holy war of warriors that will take back Al-Quds, which is the name of Jerusalem, the third holiest, the Temple Mount, the third holiest shrine of Islam, will be restored and the Jews converted to the true faith. And there's a lot of kind of religious fundamentalist hysteria that is gathering in the Middle East over this issue. Again, based on perhaps bad translations, just like with the Bible, and a misunderstanding of the meanings of the prophecies. As there is a group in Ankara in Turkey that are scholars that are doing something similar to what happened in the Christian faith when Martin Luther started translating the Bible into the vernacular and started that whole fad. There are scholars that are looking at the Hadith, and they're looking at Arabic that shows up as, because it was passed on for 3 centuries by oral transmission until it was set to paper around 1000 AD, this Hadith. But a lot of the Arabic looks like later Arabic. And so what they've done is they've pulled a lot of that out and figured that that was inserted by more fundamentalist Arab leaders that came after Muhammad. And what they have left, if they pull that out, is a far more moderate Muhammad, talking far less like Wahhabis or other extreme groups in Islam. He is not so redneck fundamentalist as he's been portrayed by later authors to be.
Well, clearly we can see that the Saudis are getting desperate. The royal family is feeling like it's under extreme threat. And like you mentioned, a lot of the oil in Saudi Arabia is in Shia areas, and so perhaps they see their survival as being on the line, and they're a country that can't even manufacture a bicycle. So, you know, it's not something to aspire to. They've got a lot of problems. I suppose we could move on to the end. Have you got any last thoughts for 2014 before we wrap it up?
Well, simply that it is definitely going to be an amazing period. I would say, though, that it's going to be one of the hottest years we've ever seen. In the mean temperature of the Earth, it will exceed 1998. And the good side of that bad news is that it might further galvanize the world to seriously look at climate emissions that need to have United Nations rules with teeth, that consortiums of countries need to come down from their climate fossil fuel use. Otherwise, we are heading towards a cascading global warming event that could raise the mean temperature of the world 11 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century, and actually start a Paleocene temperature tsunami that hasn't been seen in 45 million years. Last time it happened, it was very good for the mammalian creatures. It actually helped the speciation of mammals move from more rodent and platypus kind of creatures into horses and whales and primates, our own proto-ancestors. And so it was good for us, but it happened that 1,000 years of warming followed by a stasis of 20,000 years and another 1,000-year spike. We are doing this in a century, and where we might have a planet that's as hot as the Jurassic period of the Mesozoic era by the end of this century. And this is... I don't know if I can say any more. I've probably said too much.
Well, that's plenty dramatic. I tell you what. Okay, then how about dramatic stuff that's not seemingly driven by man? How about asteroids, solar flares, things of that nature, massive volcanic eruptions? Anything on the other front that we need to think about?
We are entering a cool period of the sun. As I predicted in 2013, not a whole lot is going to happen with solar flares. The sky is falling thing that people did in 2012, which I was dead set against for 25 years, and then a sympathetic skeptic for 25 years against the whole Jose Arguellian fueled hysteria of 2012, which has very little to do with the actual Mayan calendar. And I have a book, Nostradamus, The End of End Times, that looks at clearing the air about Nostradamus's non-association with 2012 and how good prophecy has been turned on its ear by a lot of people trying to make a buck out of playing guru in the New Age. The thing though that's so there's no asteroids that I see happening. That's more towards the end of the 2028 when Apophis comes spinning around the Earth, and that may create a alteration that no one really knows yet. Might have it come back in 2038 and actually hit the Earth. And I wonder about that because of a series of prophecies of Nostradamus that clearly describe a mountain that's near about the size of Apophis that would come out of the sky and hit the Aegean Sea and cause a splash that would go over Mount Olympus, that's 10,000 feet, and send tidal waves all the way up the Arno Valley, about 800 to 1,000 miles farther west, which is where Florence is. And he talks about 7 tidal waves going back and forth, taking down Monaco. But he doesn't give a date. So this could be any time between now and the next roughly 1,800 years left in his dated prophecies, which end in the year 3797. A simple reason to indicate that the people who wrote upwards of 3,000 books, many of them on 2012, many of them tying Nostradamus to it, obviously never read Nostradamus because he made it very clear that his final dated prediction was the year 3797 AD. So I guess the world wasn't going to end in 2012, folks. It just amazes me how stupid this whole thing with 2012 has been. And I have been on TV shows where I've been surrounded by these characters making their statements, like Vincent Bridges and others. And my statements, when they asked me about 2012, I told them very clearly how and why I'm not a part of this, and they, of course, censored that. So you never in those things hear me directly agree with what the others are saying around me in Nostradamus 2012 or Next Nostradamus or these things the History Channel did and Discovery's Nostradamus Decoded, because they've censored me.
Well, there's a business interest here, right?
Yeah. Just like there was to create all those 2012 books. So what I did is people started asking, well, when are you going to do books? The fact that your silence is deafening. You are a preeminent person in prophetic circles. Why aren't you writing anything about 2012 since everybody's mother has? And I finally came out and said, I'm writing it, but I am going to do something the others aren't going to do. I'm going to publish mine after 21st of December 2012 to clear the air and get us back on track with what these prophecies, in my opinion, and 30 years of scholarship actually say. And I'm going to finger the people that made fools out of themselves in the last 25 years, including Arguelles, the late Arguelles, Vincent Bridges, and other people, and explain how amateurish was their scholarship in this.
Well, they may have made fools of themselves, but I would like to know the sales figures for their books.
Well,
anyway.
This is probably where they were really fools, because frankly, if you want to make a living making lots of money as a writer, that's like saying, I'm going to be a kindergartner teacher and make my first million before I get tenure. It's a calling.
Some of us are. That way.
J.K. Rowling's is a rarity, God bless her soul.
Uh-huh.
Some people can make a lot of money writing, but writing is a calling. Writing is a calling to teach, and more than it is a way to make money. Although money can be made, one can make a living at it. But and you would be amazed how many very famous authors who are world-renowned are functioning somehow on a lower middle class budget.
You know, John, I listened to one of the last interviews of Philip K. Dick when he was alive recently, and I mean, it was really amazing how little money he was making. He was not quite homeless, but it was pretty pathetic trying to survive in Los Angeles. You know, one kited check to the next.
I know he was, and he is not only when you look at his writings, his notes, very huge volumes, just touching the surface of his notes that he took about trying to understand reality. I mean, Philip K. Dick is a prophet. Not only, and what I hope to do in the future is bring out more of his materials and show how he wasn't just a science fiction writer. He was another H.G. Wells, another Jules Verne, but even of a more subtle way, visionary way, into the way we perceive reality. He was a giant, but as often happens with the problem when you are ahead of your time, and if you're successful at seeing the future, you're often fighting with this. You get so far ahead of your time that you lose your audience in the past. And that is often economically difficult to deal with. I know from firsthand experience.
I'm sure you do, John. I'm sure you do. Well, I tell you what, maybe we can wrap it up here and have you give us your website and the title of your new ebook and that kind of thing.
My website is hogueprophecy.com. That's one word, HOGUEPROPHECY.com. It is, you go there, you will find everything I've written about the future, accurate and inaccurate, all documented and itemized, over 500 articles. And the page that usually about once or twice a month, I set up a stream of articles dealing with current events. What I also do is write, I have written, let's see, where is it now, 23 books and counting in 19 languages. And many of these now, since 2003, are ebooks. You can get them as PDFs. A number of my books are now coming online, new and refreshed old, by Amazon Kindle. So you can buy them as Kindle books. Just go to my website and click on Nostradamus, A Life and Myth, which is the first full-bodied biography ever written by about Nostradamus, which I wrote in 2003 and reissued on his birthday, December 23rd last year. The first time was 500-year anniversary. This is the 510th anniversary of his birth. It has new material in the Afterlife timeline, and it is now available at hogueprophecy.com and Kindle, Kobo, Nook, Smashwords, and iBook, as is Nostradamus, The War with Iran, Atlantic Prophecies of the Apocalypse, and also Book of Predictions, which is out, Predictions for 2013-2014. That's the one that has this amazing design of looks like angel wings, but it's actually made of two tails of a comet. And also, it's coming out soon. Actually, perhaps by the time this show airs on the 24th, or just a day or two after it, will be predictions for 2014, which will look intensely at these final months before the mid-decade, where the doo-doo hits the fan if we don't start really changing things happening. So these are the current books. I have many more books coming in the year 2014. Plus, I will soon have a trifecta going where, at long last, I will return to the print media. I never left the print media. The print media left me back in 2003 when I used to publish for HarperCollins, Doubleday Dolphin, and a lot of the giants. But as they started having their perpetual brain fart around that time and went kind of Cretaceous dinosaur on me, I have since had to move forward as a futurist into the next genre, and now I'm moving everything into the e-tablet, e-book format, but also I will have audiobooks and print books for order for everything that I publish and soon this year.
Sounds very good. Thanks very much. We appreciate the info, and I hope listeners get a chance to check out your website. That was hogueprophecy.com. And since I regularly visit there, I have a good familiarity. So I guess we'll wrap it up here, John. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. And I just add, join my Facebook page, which is brand new. I have a media Facebook page. So come in and visit and like it. And you will always know where I'm talking with the monks or anyone else, because okay. I do my media there.
Okay, thank you so much. And Disaster Cat, Uriel, thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's been really, really fascinating. And thank you so much for doing the interview, John. It's great.
Thanks for having me on.
We appreciate it. That's it. It's a wrap, folks. Thanks much. Bye-bye.